In this episode, who dressed nomads and what sacred meaning their clothes had. Fine dress helps to impress, they say, and this phrase has a deep, sacred meaning. In the modern world, more and more people are subject to the influence of fashion. In fact, now many couturiers try new things with shapes, colors and models of clothes, both for men and for women. But in the first place, from ancient time, clothes was needed for certain purposes: to heat and protect. Later it became a decoration. Of course, the writers of fairy tales could not neglect the wardrobe items. For example, a raincoat or invisible cap or 7-league boots. Modern technologies are developing so quickly that perhaps these magic things will soon become part of our daily life. And if you look deep into history, you can find out how our ancestors, without technical production and high technologies, did not just incredibly beautiful and high-quality garments, but also endowed them with truly wonderful properties. Clothing as a symbol of civilization. When does culture appear? Culture appears when shame appears. How could clothes make a difference? Craftswomen put there a benevolent symbol, a protective symbol, the secret meaning of the Kazakh outfits. Clothes showed if a woman was Paris or not. How did our ancestors dress, and did fashion exist in this steppe? Interesting stories and facts from this part of the life of the ancient nomads. Watch right now. As the famous French couturier Yves Saint Laurent said, dressing is a way of life. Moreover, this statement is relevant not only for modern men but also for our ancient ancestors. And you cannot even imagine how powerful it is. Clothing keeps so much information about how people lived a century ago, we can explore history through it. My name is Andrei Slozhin. It is the Time Puzzle. It is not known for sure when exactly people began to sew their clothes. Historians suggest that this happened in the Stone Age. It was with the invention of labor tools, humanity began to take the first steps in the production of clothing. Of course, those things can hardly be called wardrobe items. They simply had certain functions, and the main one was to keep people warm. But it turns out that clothes has a much deeper meaning for people. This is evidenced by socio-anthropologist, a UNESCO expert of the intangible cultural heritage, Efrat Imambek. When does culture appear? Culture appears when shame appears. Shame is the first manifestation of the dominance of moral norms over natural ones. This is culture. It appears in the Bronze Age. After all, we see the human need to hide the most intimate places that are associated with this sacred thing, with the sacred part of life. It is called love. Historians have been able to restore the image of the clothes of people of the Bronze Age from rock drawings. Various descriptions of travelers, as well as archaeological finds, played a huge role. The honored art worker of the Republic of Kazakhstan, artist designer Muslim Jumagaliyev, told us how the production of fabrics and clothing originated in the territory of ancient Kazakhstan. In the Saka, Hun and Andronova periods, people produced fabrics. They also produced fur. There were furries. There was a need for them. They made fabrics, flax made of hemp. But by that time they already had trade relations with China, with India. Next comes the Mediterranean, Byzantium. Consequently, they began to get more expensive, high-quality fabrics. The clothes of representatives of the Turkic world had a number of similarities. This was explained by the fact that it was supposed to be simple not only in production but also in wearing. Art critic Natalia Bajenova told us about this. First of all, it is practical. And regardless of whether it was women's or men's, formal or for everyday use, or even children's. First of all, they all had a tunic-like cut. Of course, they had to ride very often, so they needed freedom of movement and, of course, natural breathing materials. Fabrics were also used. Later, they began to use cotton fabrics. A revolution in the steppe fashion, according to researchers, was made by the Saka tribes. It was they who were among the first to develop a style of clothing that simplified a long stay in the saddle. Thus, according to the artifacts found in the burial mounds of Saka, the archaeologists discovered clothes that, without exaggeration, can be called the progenitor of all trousers and pants in the world. Pants and trousers are the invention of nomads, and it was this fashion that changed the Mediterranean style of clothes. The original Turkic name for this item of men's clothing required for horse riding is sim. And these pants were made of very thick wool. Felt is uncomfortable, but more often pants were made of leather. At least the inside was soft leather. Now everyone can buy and wear almost any type of clothing, whether it is a chic costume or military uniform. And the nomads were very strict with this. That's because dressing was one of the ways to identify a person.
Одежда всегда выполняла вплоть до последнего.
Until recently, clothing always served as an indicator of social status. Clothing reflected the social hierarchy. Clothing was an expression of this social hierarchy. It was not by chance that there were objects, attributes. In the fashion language, accessories that only certain people had the right to wear. For example, an ordinary soldier could not wear a helmet that would look more solid and beautiful than that of his commander. However, this rule was not common for all. In the steppe, there was a cohort of people to whom the usual rules in dress did not apply. These were the Batirs. The Batirs were respected by both the Khans and the common people, and they could wear anything they wanted. However, there were accessories that emphasized their special status. Batir could wear any clothes, whether it was made in the steppe or imported by merchants, but the belt and horse harness should have been domestic production. And there were a number of reasons for this. Batirs were elite warriors in the army, we can even say soldiers of the Special Purpose Squad. In addition to open battles in the field, the Batirs also conducted intelligence activities, often partisans. To do this, they of course put on different clothes in order to disguise themselves as a shepherd, or for example a hunter, or a warrior of the enemy's side. The enemy didn't know who was in front of him, and only those who understood the traditions of the steppe people could recognize the Batir. It was a kind of tactical deception which allowed the Batir to gain time and thus deliver a crushing blow. Later, as it usually happens, people began to imitate the Batirs and began to make themselves similar clothes.
В кочевом обществе, безусловно, законодателями мод были.
In the nomadic society, of course, the trendsetters were warriors. They were Khan's wives, who by virtue of trade exchanges were given some gifts. Ambassadors came, whole delegations, and they exchanged clothes in order to get the Khan's favor. It was necessary to give presents to his baibishe, his wives, himself. That's how the fashion spread. Rich people, of course, were also role models in dress. But the natural female desire to be more beautiful than others played a huge role in the spread of fashion across the steppe. Women create fashion. So it has always been. The steppe civilization are in no way inferior to Western and even more modern civilizations in this respect.
Современный.
Moreover, according to some researchers, it was the nomads who, for a long time, were the trendsetters of the Eurasian continent.
Очень долгий исторический период именно степь была
For quite a long historical period, namely the steppe was a trendsetter.
нашла свое
Steppe clothing was reflected in fashion and culture. Only after the great migration of peoples, boots appeared in the Mediterranean region, because boots are a necessity for any horseman. Pants and trousers are the invention of nomads. And it was this fashion that changed the Mediterranean style of clothes.
Эта мода сменила средиземноморский стиль одежды.
As a simple refresher, the army of the Roman Empire, which inspired fear in the whole world. They were well-trained warriors who had a rigid hierarchy, various types of troops, and even metal armor that protected them from being hit by arrows and swords. However, legionnaires had sandals on their feet, or the army of Alexander of Macedon, although many of his soldiers wore boots, but his riders were dressed in tunics, wide shirts to the knees with short or long sleeves. Nor did they wear pants. Those who rode at least once know that in no case can one ride a horse in shorts or in a skirt. It will simply rub your legs and bottom, and it is quite unpleasant feeling. Just imagine, you are riding a horse with bare legs and you are riding long distances, and then you also have to fight. Nomads avoided such discomfort because they wore pants and boots with heels, unlike sandals, allowed to hold tightly in the stirrups.
Мужские брюки, да, они полностью расписаны, вышитые.
Men's pants, they were fully painted, embroidered with floral ornaments. It looked like that, but all this was so harmonious and beautiful in the overall ensemble.
Как бы ансамбль.
For a long time, researchers didn't know why would people of the past need to decorate men's trousers with various ornaments, in the manner of women's dresses. After all, a warrior must cause fear in his opponent. The answer was found in the customs of the nomads.
Любая одежда, она всегда была декорирована.
Any clothes, it was always decorated with ornaments, even if it was just a line, some kind of ornament, or zigzag. They believed that ornaments had some protective properties. They decorated almost any clothes. Outerwear, of course, was even more decorated, especially camisoles. Vests for women. They didn't have just embroidery, there were some precious stones, or a fur line, or some different fabrics combinations.
Тканями, вставками.
Coming up next, why nomads paid attention to clothes and who could wear anything without any restrictions. Looking at modern fashion shows, many of us are surprised. Men's collections that are impractical and pretentious are particularly impressive. But hundreds of years ago, the appearance of a man had a sacred significance.
Например, взять костюм охотника, да? Сам образ охотника.
For example, take a hunter costume, the very image of the hunter. Hunter, he could have braids. The breeder didn't wear with braids. The hunter is the line between the common man and the warrior. A hunter is a person who is associated with nature. He had some kind of sacred connection with animals. Also, he had connection with the upper world. This was reflected in his clothes. He had a certain symbolism in headdresses. In fact, a hunter was distinguished by his headdress. The clothes of the hunter, as a rule, were made of skin. In the summer, it could be pants or a shirt made of thin leather or felt. In winter, a fur coat made of wolf or fox, sewn with fur inside. Shoes also had a peculiar shape.
Сапоги, у них были определенной формы, определенной длины.
A hunter, for example, had pitched boot tips, since he ran and performed some maneuvers. A stableman had a more powerful soul, a heel, because he spent a long time outside with animals so that his legs would not be cold.
Не засудить.
In the 8th century in Europe, an event occurred that radically changed the approach to the choice of clothing for hunting. The Emperor Charlemagne invited his entourage to hunt. The grandees arrived in posh suits, while the emperor put on a felt kaftan and simple pants. Then the subjects told the emperor that he should not look like a commoner. According to legend, it rained that day. After returning from the hunt, the retinue looked like beggars because their clothes were torn and dirty. The kaftan and the emperor's pants were not even soaked. After a while, of course, such simple clothes were refined to match the nobility. Moreover, in Europe they began to sew hunting costumes based on national traditions. According to researchers, this happened with the influence of the Turkic culture on the Western. After all, Kazakh belt beyidik, which used to be worn only by the Batars, eventually went to the people for functionality and another sacral feature.
Бельдик – это символ мужской силы.
Beydik is a symbol of male power. It is a symbol of composure. Not only that, it of course initially performs a very practical role. Accessories necessary for hunting are hung on a belt, like guns and fuses. And of course a knife, called arms. When a boy becomes a man, he wears a belt. And the belt is a symbol that you live in the middle world. That is one of the meanings. The belts were used by nomads and became an integral part of the image of a male warrior, a male hunter. But there were some among the inhabitants of the steppe who did not fight, did not hunt, did not produce any material values. Their clothes also deserve special attention. There were Sal, Suri, Girao. Each of them had their own costume, their own symbolism, their own semantics. Their clothes were very different from the dress of the common man. Musicians wandering in the steppe have always been distinguished by unusual outfits. For example, a cape could reach 6 meters in length, and the clothes had exceptionally bright colors. Ornaments or drawings also differed from the usual for the nomads. Many historians associate such a variety of colors, forms and patterns with the fact that these people were wandering artists who visited many owls, many countries, and took the most interesting of those cultures where they performed.
Современный Казахстан находится в буферной зоне. Как и тогда, границы были.
Modern Kazakhstan is in the buffer zone, as it was in the past. The boundaries were huge, and Kazakh culture was influenced by Middle East, Southeast Asia and Europe, of course. That's how it was. Clothes of the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century makes clear that residents, for example, of Turkestan purchased clothes from Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. Residents of modern Taraz, the region of Chu, Talas, they had a trade with the Kyrgyz merchants. As for Jetesu region, here we can observe the influence of the Chinese, Dongan, Uyghurs fashion. East Kazakhstan was affected by the Khakas, the Shors. The influence was provided by trade relations. In addition to such unusual clothes, Seri and Girao could with impunity talk about everything that happens in society. They were a kind of voice of the people. In peacetime, it was usually a criticism of the laziness and self-indulgence of some bees. But when difficult times came up for the nomads, for example war, Seri and Girao with their creativity raised the spirit of the people. In the course of researching the topic, I realized that for nomads, the clothes had a sacred meaning. There was an unwritten rule of wearing outfits, which further contributed to the fact that the person who came to the village no longer needed to say who he was and where he came from.
У одежды еще
Clothing also, like culture in general, has a very powerful ethno-cultural function, an ethno-distinctive function. Therefore, the fashion of one people is very different from the fashion of another. In fact, clothes is like a business card. Therefore, they say a fine dress helps to impress. When they met someone new, they instantly could see who was that person, where he came from. Coming up next, secret meaning of ornaments. Kazakh national dresses are very colorful, vibrant, and abound in various ornaments. In ancient times, visiting merchants loved to buy such ready-made clothes or fabrics. Naturally, they were resold in other countries. But it is unlikely that sellers knew what message was hidden in every element of such an ornament. For a long time, buyers thought it was just a decoration. Kazakh ornament can be conventionally divided into several types. Zoomorphic ornament, or as we also can call it, animal ornament. Cosmogonic ornament. This is also a separate topic, very rich and interesting. There are all these vortex sockets. They are very often used in tekemets and in embroidery. Floral ornament. It is mainly used in embroidery, and it is also so diverse. All these species. There is an object ornament even. The main goal of the Kazakh ornament is to protect against various misfortunes, including otherworldly ones. Researchers have no exact answer when exactly the ornament appeared. We only have theories. One says that the ornament appeared thanks to primitive artists who originally painted some life situations on the rocks, whether hunting, sunrise, or a long migration. Another theory says that the ornament appeared due to the pagan understanding of the structure of the world. The third tells that the person aspired to symmetry, like all life on the planet, and took his inspiration from nature.
Это же самые первые орнаменты, которые идут к нам из-
These are the very first ornaments that come to us from the most ancient times. Here are these zigzag lines, squares, cubes, circles, and so on. Floral ornament and plants are the symbol of fertility. Geometric pattern. It is characteristic for weaving, characteristic for tea mats, carpets. Indeed, it is geometric in structure, but it also can include cosmogonic and zoomorphic elements. They are simply geometrized.
Просто они геометризованы.
Continuing to study the patterns, the researchers found out that almost all nations in the world had quite similar patterns. There are several main motifs, including, of course, the world tree, the circle, and the square. Each of them also has a common meaning. For example, the circle symbolizes the heavenly beginning or the sun. The world tree is a conductor between the three worlds, the upper, middle, and lower. The square is a sign of the material world. It is also an order and stability. In addition to the ornament, special importance was given to the color of the fabric. But how did the nomads in ancient times painted it?
Дело в том, что еще до того, как
The fact is that even before the aniline dye appeared in Kazakhstan, all the dyes were made by the skilled workers themselves. Of course, there was the Silk Road, where you could buy something, but mostly they used dyes that could be extracted from plants. They made special blanks. For example, throughout the country there was such plant. It is called madder. It is red. Moreover, its roots were used. They were even divided. The top layer of the root, the inner part, and the central part. And all of these plants had different colors in different seasons. The main color was red and all its shades. Red color symbolized fire and sun as a symbol of life, beauty, and power.
он вообще в декоративно-прикладном искусстве казахском, он как бы преобладает, разные его оттенки.
Red color. It seems to prevail in Kazakh applied art. Its different shades, from coral to deep burgundy shades. Clothes were mainly made of leather or suede.
Замш.
Kazakhs preferred such colors as orange, such warm shades, brown, ochre,
Личный.
and embroidery. It looked very rich in such warm-colored fabrics.
Очень богато смотрелось в таких оттенках теплых.
Also, white color was often used. It is a symbol of purity, innocence, justice, and also a high social status. But how did they create such outfits? After all, in the past, nomads did not have sewing machines or modern devices for sewing. In addition, they never use sewing patterns in their work. Natalia Volodeva, candidate of art history, knows the answer to this question.
Арсенал технических средств изготовления традиционного костюма, он
Arsenal of technical means of making traditional costume, it was formed in the most ancient times. Initially, of course, these were needles which were made exclusively from natural materials, bone, fish needles. Gradually, metal products began to appear. The shape, size of these needles could vary greatly. And over time, this toolkit, it was constantly being improved. Much depended on what kind of fabric was planned to sew. For example, thicker, coarser materials required respectively thicker needles. For example, leather. These could be needles that were thick, with a wide eye, which allowed to use a sufficiently thick thread or even the vein of an animal. In each Kazakh family, women were originally engaged in the production of clothing. It was one of their household duties. Of course, there were also specially trained people who produced clothing for nobility or for sale. But the common people, as a rule, did everything themselves.
изначально, конечно, для раскроя использовались ножи.
Initially, of course, knives were used for cutting. Scissors for cutting appeared quite late. And initially, the cutting was generally done exclusively in a straight line, not by cutting the cloths, but by notching, by marking out some cuts along the edges and tearing the cloth along the length. Women could sew dresses, shirts, pants, but in the history there is not a single mention of the fact that they made shoes. It has always been a purely male job. This moment is explained quite simply. When creating shoes, more physical strength was required. The clothes for the nobility were made by the master of extra class. The creation of a dress or jacket could take several months. But the result was astounding. So in history there are mentions of travelers who complemented the decoration of the Kazakh nobility.
В упоминаниях, в записях у испанского путешествия Клавихи
There are mentions in the records of the Spanish traveler Clavijo. He drew attention to the costume of Aisha Bibi. He writes that he was struck first by the image. She had a whitened face, some makeup, high headdress decorated with gems and precious stones, amethyst, garnets, sapphires and emeralds. But mostly he was shocked by the dress. Red embroidered dress. The bottom of the dress was stretched to 10 meters and the concubines carried it. I was amazed, he says, with this suit. This is the real note of the Spanish traveler Clavijo. To create such dresses for rich women, several types of embroidery and sewing were used. Moreover, not only the Kazakhs practiced such methods. This method of decorating clothes was popular almost throughout Asia and was actively used at that time. But it was quite a laborious process. Creation of a golden thread deserves a special notice.
Есть разные варианты золотой нити, которые использовались в различное время, в различном...
There are different variants of the gold thread, which were used at different times, in different regions. The first option is to drag the thread when the thread itself is pulled out of a piece of metal. They become very, very thin and gradually it is pulled out like this. The second option is when the original thread is made of another material, cotton material or silk. It is wrapped around with this thin elongated thread. This is a kind of more sophisticated technology because it allows you to save some costs a little. And plus to this, the original elongated string, it should be much thinner. But it eases the process of embroidery because such thread is more flexible. It is more elastic. Coming up next, how did clothing affect the customs of the steppe inhabitants and why throwing the neckband away was forbidden? During this study, I was able to find out the facts that were told about the clothes worn by children and people of respectable age. As it turned out, their attire also had a secret and deep meaning. Kazakhs and Proto-Kazakhs had such a concept. At the 6th week from the beginning of pregnancy, a baby was called Etijan, the soul of meat, a piece of meat. When it is born, Shibenjan literally means the soul of a fly. A baby fights for life. And only 40 days later, he would become Rukanijan. Spirituality was infused into him. And so, up to 40 days, a child had 2 shirts. 2 undershirts, which his mother put on him. The seams were out. As soon as the child turned 40 days old, the mother hid 1 shirt and did the following to the second one. The second shirt was filled with gifts, sweets, and hung on a dog's neck. It was called kolek, dog's shirt. It was a tribute to Ashina, the wolves. So they let the dog out, and the children grabbed those gifts and sweets. The first, hidden shirt, also had its purpose. When the boy grew up and could already ride a horse independently, the mother took it out and sewed her son's first vest on the collar of the shirt he was wearing now.
Почему у казахов нельзя было никогда?
Why the Kazakhs could never throw the collar away? They took this vest from the collar, put it into new shirt. And until death, a man wore this vest with the smell of mother's milk, the colostrum. He wore it to death. And at the end, when he was dying, they put that vest in a funeral shroud under his head. And in any critical situation, when it came to disputes, the courts, he could pull out this shirt and say, "I swear by my mother's milk." And it was considered superior to all laws. Until the child was 4 years old, he wore soft shoes. But as soon as he became able to ride a horse, and according to nomadic traditions, a child should be 3 to 4 years, they sewed other, more rigid shoes for him and always with a heel, since it helped to keep a tight grip on horse for an inexperienced rider. Little girls also had special traditions in dressing. From the age of 5, a mother began to sew a dowry for her daughter since she turned 5, and a father already ordered jewelry for the wedding. Also, the girls began to make their own wedding dress. Its main attribute was, of course, the headdress, saukile.
Сам форму саукиле определялась эта связь с верхним миром.
The very shape of saukile shows that it symbolized a connection with the upper world. It comes from the Saka period. There is a proverb, Keujuz Jeldik, Kudamin Jeldik, which means the son-in-law and relatives' relationship lasts for 100 years, but co-parents-in-law are for 1,000 years. It was also a sacred thing, saukile itself. It introduced the ancestors of one house to the ancestors of another house. In some regions, a young woman wore saukile until conception of the child occurred. Then, after conception, everyone tried to please her. She gave birth, and there was the ritual of putting the shawl on. And for people of respectable age, the approach of choosing and wearing clothes for them also had a special meaning. When a mother bestowed her daughter would give her an akrat, a funeral scarf. The woman used to wind it up. In the village, everyone saw that this woman had already raised her children, bestowed them, and now can prepare for death.
В 63 года женщина
At the age of 63, a woman completely took off her jewelry. She began to wear more ascetic, monotonous clothes, because 63 years is connected with religion. This is the period of the life of the Prophet Muhammad. And people of that age were already considered long-lived. And they had such the most modest, clean, light clothes. They were preparing for the outer world. A modern man is chasing fashion, buying himself new clothes, trying to stand out from the crowd with an unusual cut or color. There are those who dress simply and do not attach much importance to their appearance. But most of people hardly think about how different their ancestors were about what they wear.
В истории был период, когда национальные костюмы
There was a period in history when national costumes were not worn at all. Now more and more modern designers use Kazakh vibes and ornaments in their works. Well, fashion is repeated. After all, as they say, everything new is actually well forgotten old. My name is Andrei Slozhin. It was the Time Puzzle. See you.